Yes?
I'm very curious about what you've spoken about on your website of the collective consciousness between a group of people and how it was elevated to something that was beyond anything that anybody had ever experienced before. And could you speak more about that?
Well, it's what I teach. It's called Evolutionary Enlightenment. See, I interpret this as the evolution of enlightenment. I'm talking about the Eastern interpretation of the Eastern definition of what that means. So, enlightenment, if enlightenment is the experience of consciousness beyond ego, traditionally it was understood, and this is a very simplistic interpretation, to be when the individual experiences their own consciousness beyond the very fixed and narrow parameters of self-concern. They begin to experience the infinite ground of all being. They literally consciously begin to directly cognize it, experience it. But up until recently, it was all only experienced within the context of the inner subjective experience of the individual. Like, I had this amazing experience, or I'm always living in, depends on, some amazing experience of an expanded state of consciousness beyond ego. So from the very beginning of my teaching career, like 20 years ago when I started, I always wanted to know, what does this thing mean about life? Because I started seeing that people having these enlightenment experiences would rarely translate into any kind of meaningful, observable, measurable transformation. About sometime in the first year, and I was just traveling around and teaching literally every night, I was invited over to have lunch by some of these people that just decided to follow me around. And I remember after lunch, I saw two of them having a conversation together, a man and a woman, and I suddenly knew, there was really kind of a spontaneous recognition that whatever it was they were sharing together, and I knew that there was a way that they were meeting each other, and they were just having a conversation beyond ego. It was obvious to me that they were sharing in a deeper and higher place beyond ego. What they were sharing was something miraculous. And I knew then that what they were sharing was more important than whatever it was they were getting from me personally. Right? And that would be, I was interpreting what they were getting from me as some kind of experience. But I noticed, right, which was their own experience, I realized that what they were sharing together had infinitely more significance. So that was really the beginning of my interest in all this, and I've always been interested in transformation. Because at the beginning, I was always excited when people had these amazing experiences. I go, wow! But then after a while, when I'd see people didn't change, I thought, who cares? You see? And of course, now when people tell me about their experiences, I kind of it doesn't even move. It doesn't move me to hear. If people could tell me they could make up any story they wanted about some amazing experience, and it literally has no effect on me anymore, because I'm interested. But has the individual changed? Have they become a different person? Is there a measurable, actual difference? Have they evolved beyond ego? Are they really a different kind of human being? Have they awoken to what I'm calling the authentic self? Do they care about the creation of the future and the evolution of consciousness and culture as if their life depended on it? Are they living to create the future? Have they stopped living a selfish life? Is that a measurable and obvious kind of transformation we can see? Or are they just another narcissist who had another great experience? And so earlier on, I made this distinction, and in those days I made a difference between what I called personal enlightenment, which was for the individual, versus what I called that impersonal enlightenment, which was about consciousness itself. And then over the last 8 or 9 years, I changed impersonal to evolutionary enlightenment, because now the emphasis is more this impersonal developmental field that we create intersubjectively. So what I'm interested in, and what all my work is really dedicated to, is showing people how through coming together we can invoke an intersubjective field of enlightened, egoless consciousness and begin to engage in the context of egoless consciousness itself. Because usually when people would experience egoless consciousness, they would have to transcend the mind altogether and just be. And I don't really, and to me that's kind of useless because as long as you're experiencing transcendence, that's nice for you. But what about when you come back and you open your eyes and open your mouth and have to begin to engage with the world and life and other people? That's really when the rubber meets the road. That's to me when it all counts. So if we can actually begin to engage, meet each other in the context of being individuals in an impersonal field of enlightened or egoless consciousness, using the mind, meeting in a kind of meeting in a kind of intersubjective field of non-duality. Non-duality means there's only one, there's not two, there's only one. But in the context of there being only one, I'm still an individual and you're still an individual who has an evolving mind. So there's the one and the many merge seamlessly in one kind of amazing new potential. And I'm personally convinced, and I could be wrong about it, but I don't think I am, that this means the evolution of enlightenment, because I personally don't know how this extreme postmodern narcissism, this highly, highly developed sensitive self ego structure that's nobody's fault, that we all got so stuck on, I don't know how any of us, we're never going to be able to get out of this thing on our own. We can only do it through literally meeting each other in a place beyond it together. It's a leap beyond individuality. And at the same time, we don't want to lose the amazing capacity for individuation or individuality, because that's what makes us so extraordinary. That's what gives us this incredible capacity to objectify our experience. And it's the last thing in the world we want to give up. But we don't want to be trapped in it. So we don't want to give up the gift of evolution itself, which is this very highly developed capacity for individuation. We want to take it with us, but we want to transcend the ego at the same time. And so that's basically what I'm interested in. And as I said, I think that's what the future of enlightenment is. And I think the implications for the evolution of culture at the leading edge are pretty obvious when you think about it. It's very interesting. Sometimes you can think, sometimes if you get extraordinary people together, some, really bright, sophisticated, leading-edge people in their own field, sometimes you get them together. More often than not a lot comes of it, because often people are just they're trapped in their own. They may be geniuses in their own right, but they're often trapped in their own world. You see, so the way I understand the evolution of consciousness happening now, it is happening in an intersubjective developmental process where the individual's evolution is completely intertwined with the evolution of this intersubjective field. And both have to happen seamlessly and simultaneously at the same time. It's kind of like it's a very delicate experiment. But, so that's kind of what I'm working on. And it's a very unstable thing right now, but I'm convinced that when it becomes stable, it's going to become much easier for a lot more people to have access to that process. But to me, when I really started seeing this and discovering, I just felt, well, this is it. I mean, nothing's more important than this. And then all the usual kinds of spiritual practices support that process, but then the personal spiritual experience is not the goal. It's just a means to a larger end, which is this infinitely creative. It's a process and an experience that is inherently meaningful. Because when you're in the midst of the kind of experience, practice, process I'm describing, you're aware of the fact that literally a new potential is emerging that you are responsible for creating, and you're not doing it alone, because what I'm describing can't happen within the subjective experience of any individual. It can only happen in the context of this creative friction at the highest level. And then the individual becomes enlightened in the context of this intersubjective field, where it's very hard at a certain point to see where does one individual end and where does the other begin. And at the same, right, which is the experience of communion, but at the same time in that context, the the essence or the experience of the individual, of being an autonomous individual, is accentuated. In other words, one feels, I have never felt more like myself, my own autonomous, creative autonomous self in my life. I've never felt more free as an individual. And so in this context, these two extremes of communion and autonomy merge into one non-dual event. And I see that as the evolution of enlightenment.